Every Disney fan is satisfied when a villain gets their comeuppance at the end of a movie. But have you ever imagined what would be the real-world sentence for Anxiety for the terrible things she's going to do in Inside Out 2? In Riley's next movie, Anxiety is going to do terrible things, like imprisoning the old emotions against their will in a place that, besides being tight, is extremely dark and scary. This would be characterized as the crime of false imprisonment, which is when someone restricts the freedom of others out of revenge or self-interest, which is the case here. For each character Anxiety imprisons, she could get 3 years in prison. Since there are 5 emotions, she could be sentenced up to 15 years. Moreover, since we know the old emotions will escape if any of them get hurt in the process, which is likely since they'll be jumping from the top of the command center of emotions, the penalty for each character put in false imprisonment would increase from 3 to 8 years. In other words, she could be imprisoned for up to 40 years. When Anxiety gets out of jail after serving her entire sentence, Riley would already be a grandma, or close to it. And this sentence, we're only talking based on what we've seen in the Inside Out 2 trailer so far. Who knows, this sentence could increase even more. Check out now all the sentences some Disney villains would receive if they really were arrested for their crimes. Ernesto De La Cruz. If you watched Coco, you were surely as shocked as I was when it was revealed that the kind and friendly Ernesto was actually a person, both in life and in death, extremely cruel and wicked. We found out that the great Mexican singer actually gained all his fame by stealing all his songs from Miguel's grandfather, the talented Hector. This would be characterized as intellectual property theft from another artist, which would result in a hefty fine of $250,000 plus up to 10 years in prison. And as if that weren't enough, Ernesto also poisoned Hector, killing Miguel's beloved ancestor, which would be the worst crime of all, murder. That would be enough for Ernesto to be sentenced to life imprisonment, meaning he would be locked up forever, or even, depending on the jurisdiction, could receive the death penalty. But since he's already in the afterlife and everything was only discovered when he was there, life imprisonment would be ideal for such a deceitful villain. King Stefan. King Stefan is that typical movie villain who is extremely charismatic and loved by all who think they know him. That's because he has a facade of kindness that hides his true evil and villainous side, as he basically uses selfish criteria to decide which wish he will grant, keeping those he considers rotten locked up inside his castle. In other words, the Magnificent keeps people's wishes imprisoned against their will, meaning he practically steals other people's ideas, which is considered intellectual property theft, also resulting in a $250,000 fine, which he could easily afford as a king. But besides that, he could be imprisoned for up to 10 years in jail, and if the judge considered the act as theft, he could still have the sentence increased by 2 to 6 years, giving between 12 and 16 years of prison for King Stefan. Apart from this crime, King Stefan could be imprisoned for the crime of false accusation against another person, which in this case was Asha, whom he accused of trying to steal the wishes of the subjects of the Magic Kingdom of Roses. For this additional crime, the wicked sovereign could get another 20 years in prison, which would make him spend between 32 and 36 years in prison, and when he got out, he would already be a harmless old man. Although in the movie, he got a much worse sentence than that, as he will be imprisoned forever in the Magic Mirror, as if it were a life sentence. Served him right. And since we're talking about wrongdoers, today let's put #villains in the comments, and next to it, you can write which villain from a Disney movie or cartoon you think is the cruelest of all, so we can see who the worst villain of all is. Ursula. Surely Ursula is one of the most striking and worst villains in Disney history. She is intensely frightening, and her cruelty seems to know no bounds. And the live action of The Little Mermaid only came to reaffirm that although I find the original Ursula much scarier, the Sea Witch has a long list of crimes committed, among which we can mention the deceptive inducement, when she deceitfully induces Ariel to sign the contract where the innocent princess commits to give her voice and her own life by turning her into a polyp, which would give her a sentence of up to 8 years in prison. Besides that, the fact that she has several sea creatures trapped, transformed into polyps, including King Triton, constitutes the crime of false imprisonment, which would easily give her another 50 years of conviction. When she transforms into Vanessa and tricks Prince Eric, Ursula commits the crime of identity fraud, which would give her another 2 years in prison. And finally, and worst of all, 2 attempted murders, one against Prince Eric, which thanks to Ariel, the witch ends up hitting his 2 servants, and another attempt against Ariel herself, which was only prevented because she has a terrible aim and because Prince Eric managed to stop the witch with the boat, in legitimate defense of course. And just for this last crime, Ursula could get up to 20 years in prison. Totaling all the crimes of the Sea Witch, it would amount to around a lengthy 80 years in prison, or even more. But in the case of the villain, the sentence she received ended up being much worse. Syndrome! Now let's talk about the most psychotic villain of all from today's list, Syndrome from 2004's The Incredibles. That's right, the innocent boy who grew up to become a vengeful millionaire who throughout the movie we discover is responsible for the deaths of more than 20 superheroes. That alone would be enough to request life imprisonment or even the death penalty for the villain. But not satisfied with having committed these heinous crimes, the villain also tortured Mr. Incredible and tried to end his entire family, which is attempted murder. Not to mention the fact that he sent a giant destructive robot to the city, causing terror among the population and destruction to public property, which would result in ridiculously high fines, plus another life imprisonment. And before I forget, the villain poses as a government agent, even though he is not one, which would already give him 3 years in prison. Undoubtedly, Syndrome is one of the villains with the longest rap sheet among all the evil Disney characters. Fortunately, he won't be able to commit any more crimes ever again, as he ended up, let's say, rendering himself permanently useless. But we can say that Syndrome has some tough competition. But before we talk about her, if you're not yet subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button. That way, you won't miss our videos about cartoons and animated movies. Evelyn Dor. In the second Incredibles movie, released 14 years later, in 2018, we see a villain who commits several crimes as well in the superhero universe. The vengeful millionaire was responsible for planning a series of crimes which amounts to conspiracy, and she is also guilty of sabotage, as she does this by compromising the functioning of the yacht, as well as by using mind control technology glasses to hypnotize people against their will. In fact, everything she did on the yacht puts the lives of several people in danger, which could very well qualify as attempted murder of several people at once, as everything was premeditated. Moreover, she physically kidnaps Elastigirl, as well as mentally kidnaps several people through mind control of all of them. Speaking of mind control, she does this collectively, which could very well be considered the crime of domestic terrorism. In other words, the villain's list is almost as extensive as Syndrome's, but it doesn't include crimes as heinous as the first villains. But this shows that indeed the villains of The Incredibles are the most dangerous among all, and the detail is that none of them actually had any superpowers. For her crimes, Evelyn could easily get from 50 years in prison to even life imprisonment, which, let's agree, would be quite fair, since she is a very, very dangerous person. Lotso. Now let's talk about the cute, seemingly innocent, and equally dangerous Lotso, the villain of Toy Story 3. After being abandoned and replaced by another toy identical to him, Lotso would begin a life full of cruel and evil acts, which would include things like kidnapping, which was the case with Buzz Lightyear. And just this crime alone could result in up to 30 years in prison. Moreover, the villain practically created a gang, which is gang formation, which would give him an additional 3 years in the toy jail. And finally, his cruelest act of all was the attempted collective murder. It happens when Lotso asks for help from Woody and the other toys to climb the emergency ladder, and for that, he pretends that he would turn off the conveyor belt that was taking all the toys to the incinerator. But instead of doing what was agreed, he leaves the toys behind, condemning them to melting, which would mean the death of each one of them. This crime alone would be enough to send Lotso to the Toy World Penitentiary forever. In other words, he would have a much worse fate than just being abandoned, as he would never have freedom again. Certainly, Lotso's crimes are some of the cruelest among all Disney villains, and this is because he's just a cute and gentle teddy bear, which shows that appearances really deceive much more than we imagine. We're leaving 2 really cool videos for you to check out and have a little more fun with us. I heard the one on the left is really cool. If I were you, I'd definitely check it out.